I asked him whether Rishi Sunak was right to invite the Chinese government to that AI summit.
Well, I originally was opposed to the idea of bringing China, and there are some very good reasons. I think it's important for the UK and other members of what I call the free world to examine where the problems and the threats come from, and then try and set a series of clear rules around how this is used, developed, and what it's used for. I think the problem if you bring China in at the outset, and this is where I disagree completely with the Foreign Office, that somehow you need to have them in as a dialogue. Yes, you can dialogue with them. You dialogue from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. China themselves are, as you know, constantly breaking and abusing rules from the WTO through to the WHO. After all, COVID was a classic example of disregarding the rules of notice, which has led to many millions dying. So all of that is the nature of the organization, the Communist Party of China. And they're doing the same here. And the big threat is that they get into this meeting and, of course, make sure that there isn't really any great new set of rules or observances that should be made because they don't suit China. And that's where the problem arises. I think starting with China is not a great place. I think coming to China with a set of obligations supported by the sort of markets that they want to get into, I think is a different game altogether.
At the same time, though, and I get what you're saying about you could go to them later, but if you really want China to abide by any rules or regulations around AI, don't you need buy-in from them right from the very beginning?
I can't. I can't think how many times we've used this argument about getting China to have buy-in, and yet China abuses every single thing it's supposed to have bought into. The WTO rules, they're abused by China dramatically, espionage, stealing of priority intelligence, all this sort of stuff. And IPs that get stolen regularly, businesses have to leave China because they can't cope any longer. All this sort of stuff is completely against the WTO rules in trade, yet they do them. And the problem is the free world spends its time trying to forget about that as they go for more contracts with China. So the real problem is they will essentially make sure that those rules are not, or the ways and the observances of practice are not set clearly. And the problem really is that China poses the single biggest threat to us in this area. They are the world leaders in AI, and they're the world leaders in genomics. BGI is the biggest genomics company in the world, and they, of course, swamp the world with their COVID testing and pregnancy testing. And they've been gleaning genetic information, which has now been taken back to China for further work. They forcibly extract genes from people in Xinjiang. They abuse people and they steal that data. So the problem we've got right now is it's a country that has already set the pattern in their dominant position as to where they want to be. And that genomics coming together with AI is the bit that simply won't be properly discussed at this conference because it's there where China poses a very big threat.
Do you think Rishi Sunak's been a bit naive, I guess, in his attitude towards China?
Well, I think the Foreign Office is distinctly naive in deliberately ignoring the nature of what Rishi Sunak used to say was a systemic threat. Our position now has weakened dramatically, but the real problem is they are a systemic threat, and nothing describes that more than their purpose in life, which is as the dominant players in AI and the dominant players by our country mile in genomics, China is now bringing the two together so that AI and genomics work together. So you have the gene pool and the nature or even characteristics of nations or of individuals. You can build them through the genes that you have. And then what you have is AI able to help you both do that and then replicate those elements internationally for whatever divisive reasons you may wish. This is a serious threat to us because it will weaken us one way or the other. And I think not recognizing that beforehand is a big mistake from the Foreign Office altogether.
You've obviously has had a long record of speaking out against about China. Liz Truss has obviously made this intervention as well. Do you think she's turning into a bit of a backstreet driver here?
Well, I don't think it's a case of driving, it's a case of advice. Of course, Liz is quite in order to say that what she thinks, she's not in the government. But I think the real problem here right now is that I'm convinced that Rishi Sunak will not re-examine this because the Foreign Office don't want him to, the Foreign Secretary doesn't want him to, and they've set this up. The key question is now, who are they sending over? And there's some very, very nasty, dodgy people that are running this area in China. And
Just to
that's
come,
the real difference.
just to come in again on Liz Truss, you say that it's advice rather than being a backseat driver, but I guess some people would say, look, she only lasted 44 days as Prime Minister. I guess, how does she have the confidence to give advice to the guy who's got the job now?
Well, she was Foreign Secretary and she was Trade Secretary. So the fact is she's been pretty well immersed in this. My view is that I didn't want them to invite China originally because I felt that with their dominance in these two areas, they would water down anything that we came to any conclusions of. Their markets are across where we are and America is. But if we are able, therefore, to set the parameters of this before we get talking to them, it makes it much easier, therefore, to manage that. Whereas if they're at this discussion, then they take away what we know, they take away what our fears are, and they then are able to carry on, which they've done, it doesn't matter WHO, any other rule you set for China, they just abuse, whether it's sort of COVID and the WHO, it just goes on. So they don't really give a damn about anything that we set, but what they will find very interesting is what we think are the real issues and the threats from China, and they will act accordingly, I think. And that's where the big problem arises. AI and genomics are the real threat, a threat on a scale that we haven't yet seen.